In 2019, Washington believed Iran was cornered. The United States had launched one of the most aggressive economic pressure campaigns in modern history. Sanctions were crushing Iran's economy. Oil exports were collapsing. Many analysts believed Tehran would eventually have no choice but to surrender to negotiations. But instead of backing down, Iran made a move that shocked Washington. Behind it was one powerful force, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC. Their strategy didn't just resist American pressure. It forced the United States to reconsider the risks of escalation in one of the most critical regions on Earth. And suddenly, the question was no longer about Iran alone. Because if pressure didn't break Tehran, what does that mean for other powerful countries like Pakistan or Turkey? In international politics, power is often measured in armies, economies, and alliances. But sometimes, a single strategic move can force even the most powerful nations to rethink their plans. When the United States launched its maximum pressure campaign against Iran, Washington believed time was on its side. Sanctions were tightening. Iran's economy was under strain, and many policymakers believed Tehran would eventually have no choice but to surrender to negotiations on American terms. But then something unexpected happened. Instead of collapsing under pressure, Iran's most powerful military institution, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, known as the IRGC, responded in a way that changed the entire strategic equation. Suddenly, the pressure campaign was no longer just about economics. It had become a dangerous geopolitical standoff. And the world began asking a bigger question. If Iran could resist the pressure, what would this mean for other powerful countries in the region? For decades, the relationship between the United States and Iran has been shaped by deep mistrust and strategic rivalry. After the Iranian Revolution of 1979, diplomatic relations between the two countries collapsed. Since then, tensions have regularly surfaced over nuclear development, regional influence, and security concerns across the Middle East. But in 2018, Washington introduced a strategy designed to fundamentally change the balance of power. It was called the Maximum Pressure Campaign. The goal was simple in theory. By imposing severe economic sanctions, the United States aimed to isolate Iran from the global economy. Oil exports, the backbone of Iran's economy, were heavily restricted. International companies were warned against doing business with Tehran. Iran's banking system faced global limitations. The expectation in Washington was clear. Economic pressure would eventually weaken Iran's leadership enough to force negotiations under new conditions. Some analysts even predicted that the pressure could destabilize Iran internally. At first glance, the strategy appeared effective. Iran's currency dropped sharply. Oil exports declined. Economic growth slowed dramatically. But geopolitical strategies rarely unfold exactly as planned. To understand how Iran responded, it's important to understand the role of the IRGC. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps was created after the 1979 revolution as a force designed to protect the country's political system and national sovereignty. Over time, it grew into one of the most powerful institutions in Iran. Unlike traditional military forces, the IRGC focuses heavily on asymmetric warfare. This means developing strategies that allow a weaker power to challenge stronger adversaries without direct confrontation. Instead of relying solely on conventional military strength, asymmetric strategies focus on leverage, influence, and pressure points. The IRGC built capabilities in missile technology, regional partnerships, and strategic deterrence. In other words, Iran's strategy was not simply about defending itself. It was about ensuring that any attempt to pressure Iran would come with serious risks. And eventually, those risks became visible. The Persian Gulf is one of the most strategically important waterways in the world. Every day, a significant portion of the global oil supply moves through this narrow corridor. For decades, maintaining stability in this region has been a priority for global powers. But during the height of the pressure campaign, tensions in the region began rising. Military activity increased. Security concerns around shipping routes intensified. Global markets started paying attention. Even minor disruptions in the region could send shockwaves through international energy prices. For American policymakers, this created a difficult strategic dilemma. Escalation could trigger wider instability in a region already facing multiple conflicts. At the same time, appearing weak was not an option for a global superpower. The result was a complex balancing act. Pressure continued, but diplomacy quietly returned to the conversation. In theory, economic pressure is designed to force an opponent into concessions. But in practice, it can also trigger resistance. Iran's strategy appeared to focus on demonstrating that the costs of continued escalation would grow for everyone involved. This was not about winning a traditional military conflict. It was about changing the calculation in Washington. If the risks of escalation became too high, negotiation would become the more practical path. And gradually, discussions began to shift. Behind closed doors, international diplomacy intensified. European governments encouraged dialogue. Regional actors watched closely. And the idea of returning to negotiations slowly gained traction. For the United States, avoiding a full-scale conflict in the Middle East remained a strategic priority. The region already faced multiple crises. Another major conflict could have unpredictable consequences. So even while political rhetoric remained firm, diplomatic channels stayed open. Because in geopolitics, negotiation is often the final stage of prolonged strategic pressure. The standoff between Washington and Tehran revealed something important about modern global politics. The international system is becoming more complex. New alliances are forming. Regional powers are becoming more influential. And traditional strategies of pressure are not always producing the outcomes policymakers expect. Countries are developing new ways to resist economic and political pressure. Strategic partnerships, regional cooperation, and diversified economic networks. This means that geopolitical influence today depends not only on military power, but also on diplomacy and strategic relationships. And this shift is forcing major powers to constantly adapt their strategies. The lessons of the Iran standoff have led analysts to examine how global powers approach other influential countries. Two nations often mentioned in these discussions are Pakistan and Turkey. Pakistan occupies one of the most important geographic positions in the world. It sits at the intersection of South Asia, Central Asia, and the Middle East. It also possesses nuclear weapons and plays a key role in regional security dynamics. Turkey, meanwhile, has emerged as a significant regional power. As a member of NATO with a large and capable military, Turkey holds influence across Europe, the Middle East, and parts of Asia. Both countries maintain relationships with the United States. At times, these relationships are cooperative. At other times, they involve disagreement over regional policies. In a world where global alliances are constantly evolving, the strategies used toward one country can sometimes influence how policymakers approach others. But every geopolitical situation is unique. And decisions made by world powers are shaped by complex calculations involving security, diplomacy, and economic interests. The standoff between the United States and Iran demonstrated a key reality of modern geopolitics. Power alone does not determine outcomes. Strategy does. Economic pressure can influence behavior, but it can also trigger resistance. Military strength can deter conflict, but it must be balanced with diplomacy. And sometimes the most important victories in international politics are not military victories at all. They are moments when escalation is avoided. Moments when negotiation becomes possible. Moments when competing powers choose stability over confrontation. The story of the IRGC's strategic response and America's pressure campaign is more than just a chapter in Middle Eastern politics. It is a glimpse into how global power works in the modern world. Strategies evolve, alliances shift, and the balance of power is constantly being reshaped. The real question now is not just what happened between Washington and Tehran, but what lessons the world's major powers will take from it. Because in geopolitics, every move matters, and the next move could change everything.